It's been almost a year since Artsakh was emptied of its indigenous Armenians, a tragedy that unfolded shamefully in our lifetime. For thousands of years they inhabited those lands uninterrupted until now. Today we're joined by Gev Iskajyan, whose voice you may recognize from our previous episodes, The Struggle for Artsakh and Tebi Artsakh. Gev lived under the blockade for 9 months and remained in Artsakh until the very end, when he was forcibly removed along with the rest of the Artsakhi people. As the former director of ANC Artsakh, Gev played a crucial role in raising awareness and advocating for the Republic of Artsakh, becoming one of its foremost voices for Western audiences and our community at large. Gev's insights and experiences provide a stark and unflinching look at the harsh realities faced by the people of Artsakh. We'll delve into the challenges of the blockade, the failures of international and local governments, and the resilience that drives the Armenian spirit. This episode is a journey through despair and determination, as we confront the brutal truths of survival in a world that has often turned its back on justice. In the coming weeks, we'll bring you more episodes featuring those who have witnessed these challenges firsthand and continue to struggle for the cause today. Stay tuned as we explore what must be done to achieve our goals.
You are listening to Haituk Talks, the official podcast of the AYF West. I'm Gev Iskajyan.
And I'm Kohar Sanikyan.
And we're just a couple of Armenians
talking in the world.
A couple of Armenians talking in the world.
The most difficult thing to watch, you're dealing with scarcity, you're dealing with shortages, you're dealing with 120,000 people that can't get access to the most basic needs, from water, food, medicine, and everything else. But to me, the toughest part to watch, especially because this is the wheelhouse, this is the work that, we delve into every day.
Yeah.
It was when the people of Artsakh would, watch these statements come in from various nations. So France would put out a statement saying that, we stand by the Armenians of Artsakh and we're not going to let anything happen to them. And then you get U.S. officials like Yuri Kim, who's the representative to the State Department, right? And just days before the ethnic cleansing happens, she goes on record and states that, verbatim, states that we will not let any violence break out or any harm befall the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, of Artsakh. And you see people's hopes escalate. You see a light shine in them. Mm-hmm. And time after time, statement after statement proves to be hollow. And nothing comes through. So the people of Artsakh are really tough and they're really resilient. And no matter what challenges, the blockade brought, historically, none of those things were, foreign to them or novel to them. There are things that Artsakhis have experienced in the past. If you look in the 90s, if you look in, if you're talking about a blockade, we dealt with that in the 90s. If you're talking about war, we dealt with that in 2016, 2022. If you're talking about displacement, we saw that in Shushi and Hadrut. Mm-hmm. So these are the things that have happened, right? And it's built a certain resiliency in the people. But watching them glimmer with hope on false promises and then having those promises broken time after time by international powers, that's very tough to take. And it's tough. It's tough to see.
You're basically saying the physical stuff, they'll get by. It's the spirit and the hope and that the invisible stuff is what really hurt them,
But who's to blame
it's what breaks
when it comes
the soul.
To this? Who's to blame, in your opinion, on Gev?
Well, I think the initial response, Kohad, is that it's the international community because of the hypocrisy, because of the lies, because of the false promises, right? But I think it's 50-50. I think the other half is us. Mm-hmm. The naivety on our behalf, on the behalf of the populace, both in, sometimes in Artsakh and in Armenia and throughout the diaspora, of this next nation that put out the statement is going to be our savior. Someone's going to come and solve this problem. Someone's going to break this blockade. Someone is going to stop this war. But that someone was always supposed to be us. And I don't know if we realized that until it was too late.
Yeah. I mean, how about from just the perspective of like you're saying, from us, right, the Armenians, but let's say the Armenian government itself as like its only really other guarantor, like, how did they specifically, let's say, fail the people of Artsakh in this way? Could we say that since we're also to blame, are they the most to blame in terms of like a geopolitical force?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say so. Let's break that into two categories in terms of tangible action that they never took, and in terms of like the state of mind that they've created within the Armenian populace. So the tangible action that they never took was during the blockade, there was never any real attempt through military use, through effective diplomacy on behalf of the Armenian government to solve that issue. In fact, it was a couple of months into the blockade that Pashinyan went on record and stated that Artsakh was a part of Azerbaijan. So imagine like how that like crushes your soul, right? And then puts us at a disadvantage, because when we're saying that these people need to be free and they need to be independent, they need to be able to control their own movement, the free movement of people, of goods, or whatever, and then the person that's supposed to represent the only Armenian state on earth, after Artsakh, essentially goes and says that this land doesn't belong to us.
Shameful.
They failed there. And then they also failed during the war, towards the end of the ethnic cleansing, when Azerbaijan launched a mass scale violent campaign. They did nothing. They committed no troops. And that's in terms of the tangible things that they've done that have harmed and affected us and Artsakh. But also, when we're talking the psychological state of mind that they've created within people, which is we're too weak to defend ourselves, that anything that happens is beyond our control. We care about Artsakh, I guess, but are we willing to do anything about it? No.
And then a complete reliance on everybody too, right?
It's a victim mentality, but it's also self-inflicted victim mentality that we don't need to succumb to, but we are anyways.
Absolutely. And think of it this way, guys. Let's say you're in Artsakh, and a lot of there's been a lot of criticism that's been levied on Russia, the peacekeepers, and some of it rightfully so, right? There's certain things that they were supposed to guarantee.
And how much do you blame Russia for that?
Yeah, and we'll get to this right now, Claude. I think it's a great point to make. And some of it has been levied against the international powers that be. Even we at the ANC, a part of our work is to make sure that the U.S. government stays accountable to their word and whatnot. But if you, as the Armenian state, you as the leader of the Armenian people, in essence, the prime minister, if you're the one that is unwilling to commit your own troops, your own government to fight for something, and you're asking whether it's Russia or the US or France to do it for you, you start at a place of disadvantage. There was conversations that we had with, folks that represented or spoke for the Russian government and folks from various governments around the world. And their first response many times was, you guys want us to commit troops and you want them to die for land that your own government isn't willing to fight for? What do you respond to that, right? So diplomatically, it's a horrible position to be in. And then psychologically for your own people to be after couple of millennia of survival, and we miraculously build a state and have an army whose sole job is to protect Armenian life, and it's not used when it matters most. that's damaging. That's damaging to the
Most
society as a
definitely
whole.
damaging. I think there's absolutely no point to having a military who's not going to exercise what their duty is. That makes zero sense.
But Gev, I mean, look, you were there for that last attack from Azerbaijan, which like was a full scale war, which we forget. Like they bombed everything, But I mean, why do you think they just chose that time to finish Artsakh off or completely occupy it? From someone from on the inside and being there. What's your like? And if anything, looking back, why do you think they chose that time? Why did they finally decide to do that?
So I think there's a couple of factors, Haig. One is I think their preference would have been not to use force. And when I say not to use force, I don't mean their preference would have been not to ethnically cleanse the Armenians out of Nagorno-Karabakh. They would have preferred to do it by exerting pressure. And the pressure we're talking about was the blockade.
Right.
So you cut people off from food, medicine, access to just the rest of the world, internet, electricity, like gas, we can go down on a litany of things that they did to inflict that type of pressure. So I think their initial goal was to have the people of Artsakh break, to be like, you know what, these conditions are undignified and they're horrid, and maybe we just want to live some type of semblance of a normal life. So we're going to go to the Azeris and say, you know what, we're willing to be a part of Azerbaijan, that we're willing to risk we're willing to forego some of our freedoms and our beliefs so that we can live a little easier. And they tried that for 9 months, day after day, 260 days, and it didn't work. The people, so many other people throughout the world would have caved, right? Including even us in the diaspora. That it's a livelihood that is difficult to imagine.
Unlivable, yeah.
So that was their initial goal. Like, let's do this without violence. Let's do a silent campaign. It didn't work, and they got to a place where they had to resort to violence to quote unquote, finish that job. And then additionally, I would add, in terms of why timing matters, if you look back historically, so in 2020, when that war broke out, it was an interesting time globally, right? Because it was the COVID pandemic. Every news outlet. So you had an election season, you had COVID, every news outlet and international media conglomerate was focused on that. When the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh happened, the topic of the town was Ukraine and Russia. There was focus elsewhere. So they look for times where the world is literally distracted to commit their crimes. So I think they use timing. They're very strategic about it. But
I was going to ask that. I was going to ask, if you had to break down the geopolitical strategies of Azerbaijan, how would you explain it? Like the diplomatic aspect, economic?
Like, how did they play those kind of different strategies to then, do that
to their
cleansing?
advantage?
Yeah.
So there are games they're willing to play diplomatically, and some they're not, because they know they can get away with it. So the games they're willing to play diplomatically is to be an energy source, a hub for energy for the rest of Europe, especially in light of sanctions against Russia. You already have historically had sanctions against Iran. So those are huge energy producers in the region. Russia has massive amounts of natural gas. Iran has massive amounts of oil. And when these sanctions were levied on Russia, there was a need to look for energy partners throughout the world. Funnily enough, EU decided to place sanctions on one dictator, and they decided to export energy from another. So they replaced Putin with Aliyev. And again, this goes back to the hypocrisy that we were talking about before. And Azerbaijan knows that its role is important in the energy sector, and it knows that to a certain degree, Europe is going to muzzle itself on Azerbaijan's war crimes and everything else, because they need them. They rely on them now. So that's the game they play diplomatically. The game that they don't play, or they stop playing, is the whole, back and forth statement righteousness game. They know at a certain time that when they want to use military force, there will be no recourse for it. No one's going to place sanctions on them. No one's going to do anything. The Armenian government is not going to fight back through every means possible, again, whether militarily, politically, diplomatically. So they have a good understanding of how the world works. It works based on interests and it works based on power, and they utilize both.
Yeah, I mean, the UK has before even Artsakh was ethnically cleansed, even in 2020 they had business interests in Artsakh in terms of natural resources
Absolutely.
and stuff, So I mean, they're playing the economic game there, which sadly is what really I feel like pushes geopolitics, right? And I mean, so everything seemed to be in the right place for them to do whatever they wanted in September. I mean, do you feel like that was the case? It was, what else could have been done,
I think you raise a great point. And it's one aspect we didn't touch on: money.
Yeah. They got
money
cash.
talks,
Economic capital of Azerbaijan.
Not just their economic capital, guys, but additionally on top of that, their moneyed interests in Nagorno-Karabakh, whether you're talking about some of the mines, whether you're talking about BP, British Petroleum, who has major vested economic interests in Azerbaijan. And what do they do with that money? For example, I can talk about the United States and the political system here. They do not have our grassroots power. They do not have our organization. They don't have the communities that we do. But the way that they're able to exert influence is literally by paying off and bribing politicians. And now there's been lobbyists and politicians themselves, guys.
Directly.
So in Europe, there's been numerous cases where ethics investigations have found the country of Azerbaijan directly sending money to politicians, and recently that spilled over to the United States.
What's his name?
Henry Cuellar. Henry
Texas,
Cuellar, who's a congressman in Texas, was shown to have been communicating with Azerbaijani government officials who were texting him, and in those texts that we saw that the Justice Department released, these guys call each other boss and El Jefe. That's the types of relationships that they have. So they're literally utilizing their money by paying off and bribing politicians.
But Gev, why do you think that it becomes almost always evident after the fact or before the fact that they're doing these corrupt tactics? They're doing all these things that the West usually would deem as a bad thing, but then it seems to never really move them away from Azerbaijan, even after we prove these things. How does that make you feel? Why do you is it just
if I was younger, Haig, I would say that that makes you feel upset, and the fact that that type of injustice is the norm in the world, that bears heavy on anyone. But the more that you work in this field, the more that you study international relations or political science, you understand that nations don't operate necessarily on a moral compass. They operate based on interest, and also there's hypocrisy across the slate. So for the United States, Putin is a dictator, but Aliyev, whose family has run the country for more than 30-40 years, whose wife is the appointed vice president, is not. And you don't even just have to make that correlation between Azerbaijan and Russia. You can even look into places Saudi Arabia, where the U.S. has vested interests, but
it's a monarchy.
They purportedly they stand against everything that we purportedly believe in. And the insult to injury in all of this, guys, is that during this time, the country that probably needs quote unquote democracy aid and all these NGOs and all these journalistic outlets that criticize the state and the government are countries like Azerbaijan. The United States hardly allocates any money for those projects. And what Azerbaijan needs the least is probably military support and financial aid for their military support, because they have all of these oil exports. And then at the same time, Armenia, who is lacking in the security apparatus, right? Who actually needs defense systems to be able to secure its borders and protect the lives of its people. what we get is democracy aid. So the country run by a dictatorship gets weapons. The country that's democratic gets democracy aid. It makes no sense, absolutely whatsoever.
Yeah. So do you feel like arguing for the moral high ground is still important at this point?
Yeah, like if it's not getting us anywhere, or like if it's not what actually moves foreign policy, like, why do we keep trying to push that, angle from our end?
So the moral high ground stuff is important because it's what like separates us from the people that want to wipe us off the face of the earth. Like, we believe in certain things in terms of like the value of human life, the respect for people's ability to have self-determination, all of those things. And also, like, we're not fueled by hatred of anything. We're fueled by the love of our people, and that's where the core driving engine of what we do comes from. So I think it's important to take the moral high ground because it defines who we are, even if there is no like necessarily tangible benefit.
It's the truth,
for it.
Right?
Yeah. At the same time, you need to be acutely aware of the fact that the moral high ground is not going to win you any points diplomatically or on the international stage. You have to provide a value, you have to show competency, and you have to show the ability to protect yourself. All of these things are, if we're going to check mark them as boxes, the Armenian government couldn't check mark a single one of them. Right. And the moral high ground is not going to stand in your borders. The moral high ground isn't going to shoot down drones. The only thing that's going to do that is your nation and your independent, your understanding that, and we're having this conversation a day after May 28th, which is an important holiday for the Armenian people and its independence. And Aram Manukyan, who was essentially the leader of that movement, his most famous quote is, "We are alone in this world, and we have no one to rely on but ourselves." So moral high ground argument is important because it's who we are. It defines who we are. However, it does not protect us. We do.
Well, so let me ask you, Gev, can you briefly explain America's not just position, but what are they doing about it, like the aid that they've promised, but also why are they giving that type of aid versus maybe security assistance, etc.? Why are they, what's their agenda behind maybe the one type of aid that they're giving us?
Yeah. So we just recently were informed that the U.S. government did a needs assessment for the 120,000 people that were ethnically cleansed, and they came to a rough number estimate of about $1.4 billion that it would take to build housing, job capacity, healthcare, psychological care, whatever all of these people, all the refugees from Artsakh need. In terms of that $1.5 billion, I think so far they've committed $50 million, which is like a chump change and means nothing.
It is more than what they originally said, right? The USAID, like 12 million or something.
They had initially given 11 million, and those things happen in increments. So all the increments combined amount to about 50 million. For them, it's chump change. It's not like, it's not a lot of money whatsoever.
I mean, compared to any other conflict that they're giving money to.
Yeah, it's a drop in the bucket compared to Ukraine.
Yeah, or whatever they're giving it to. But why do you think but what is that aid? So they're going to help with what are they doing with that money? Or plan to?
Yeah, and this is why when it comes to ANC, we hammer on the aid issue so much. And it goes back to the last point that I was talking about. Democracy aid in general isn't something that we're opposed to, especially if it's not going to pick favorites, which unfortunately the U.S. aid money that goes to Armenia does. So they'll fund outlets that they know support certain positions that happen to fall in line with the positions of the West, and at the same time, it'll support certain parties that happen to fall in line with their interests, and that includes Nikol Pashinyan and a whole array of NGOs in Armenia. One, that's a problem. Two, ideally, like I said, if it's democracy aid, you want to have like election monitors and things like that. You don't want to, that can ensure a free and a safe, voting process and a fair voting process. But again, it goes to like propaganda outlets and it goes to fill the pockets of certain parties. And that's even worse because when you've got kids in Artsakh who don't have a roof over their heads, who don't know where they're going to sleep tomorrow, whose parents cannot find jobs, you have a priority list of things that you want to send money to a country for. You have 100,000 displaced people, and you think the most important thing to do is send money to like these NGOs and outlets. That's where we have a problem. So it's like, what does America really value? The lives and well-being of Armenians or pushing their agenda?
And if you had to choose exactly how the money should be spent, what would you say?
I would say first and foremost, it goes to the most vulnerable population. And I would say that would be the Artsakhis today. So we need to make sure that they all have adequate housing. We need to make sure that they're able to live in Armenia and to live dignified with, proper jobs and all the support systems that they need. First and foremost, that's where the money should go to, address the most urgent, most acute need. Secondly, it should go to like secure our borders, to keep, villages from being shot out, to keep the encroachment of Azerbaijani troops into Armenia away, and to give people the ability to live in peace. Those two things come first, and then we can argue over 1,000 other needs and priorities. But those two are so far above the rest, and the fact that they're the most probably ignored is a problem. And one more issue is not only is the U.S. government like playing favorites in the political system, which doesn't sound like democracy to me, especially when large sums of money are being pumped into it. On top of that, they're helping their favorite parties enforce their authoritarian rule by beatdowns, by cracking down on protesters, on journalists, because they are funding this police force in Armenia who is being condemned by organizations like, Journalists Without Borders and many and even Freedom House, who are, kind of hinting that this government is not only undemocratic, but it's pretty authoritarian.
But it's funny that no matter how many of these third parties or, whatever tangible video proof that there is, like the narrative, like doesn't seem to be as aggressive on Armenia's government as it was maybe before Nikol, whereas like, they claim that, this is a more of a pro-Russian government, right? So it's just it's like no matter how bad the Armenian government could be, because they're in the pocket of the West, it ain't a problem, right?
And even that aid money isn't working. So if their claim is to like go up in the democracy index, and a lot of like, supporters of Pashinyan government will be like, well, we're 2 spots above. We were like 64th. Now we're like 59th on the democracy ratings throughout the world. It's like, great, you bumped up 3 spots, and in the process, you lost 30% of your homeland. You got an entire population ethnically cleansed, and today Azerbaijani troops are moving into Sunik. So one, you're kind of making the case that democracy isn't important.
Right,
I'm
that's
not
a great
saying
point.
It's not important, but you're doing it. And then two, here's something we don't talk about enough, and the Pashinyan government deserves criticism for this as well. Those democracy rankings, last year, Armenia was higher on that list. This year, we dropped back. So the notion that we're getting better or more democratic is not necessarily true. We're actually regressing because of Pashinyan's policies.
Last time we talked to you during the Tebi Artsakh episode, you were doing advocacy in Artsakh, the ANC Artsakh office. One real quick, like, is that office still like to be used, or is it kind of on hiatus? What's the what's the status with ANC Artsakh?
So ANC Artsakh is, the core group and staff are still working diligently in Yerevan because unfortunately, while we're removed from our homeland, we have 120,000 people that we still need to represent.
Right.
And we talked about all this aid money and, all of those other issues. Part of their job now is to make sure that that's reaching the people of Artsakh. Checks written to the government of Armenia for aid to Artsakh don't necessarily translate into all of that aid going to Artsakhis, going to Artsakhis in the right way, going to Artsakhis for the right things, and going to Artsakhis at the right time. And those accountability measures are important. Our team that's now currently based in Yerevan is helping keep track of all that so that we internationally can do our due diligence in making sure that those governments are accountable.
So then what are you up to now on Gev?
So I'm currently in Washington, D.C. I'm working with our ANCA team as the new National Grassroots Director.
Nice.
And to be honest, I not only love every second of it, but I think it's important work right now. Today, when we're talking about, as you wake up day by day, it's very difficult to hear good news from Armenia. And I put much of that blame both on our neighbors and on the incompetency of the current government. And today, with all of that, kind of sadness, some sense of defeatism throughout the Armenian world, you don't want people to become numb. You don't want people to walk with their heads down. So our job and this new position that we've created is to expand the ANCA. This is the time where everyone's expecting us to be on our back foot. This is the time where everyone is expecting us to sulk and to cry and to mourn. We have no intention of doing that. So we're going to map out the United States, places that we see Armenian populations growing. We're going to create new chapters, places where we see the ability to expand and build on relationships with stakeholders in the U.S. government and Senate and Congress. We're going to deepen, and our engagement across the board, across all 50 states, is going to be at an all-time high. So when they're expecting us to put our heads down, to sulk, we're going to fight even harder, and that's the goal right now.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I mean, I feel like in these times when most people have lost hope, even if I can't see, let's say, the oasis at the end of the desert, we just need to keep pushing forward because if we just stand there, then there's really no hope at all. So, I mean, it's times like these where we need to be that backbone because it's time. Things will change, things will get better and more opportunities will appear. But those opportunities will only appear if we're making those opportunities happen and are ready to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, we have to seize every opportunity. I think this, in general, everything that's transpired should, for lack of better word, light a fire up the asses of all the diasporans around the world.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously, gank bidilinenk uter shadanank. So what should we do? Why would we just reach this plateau and stay there?
What's the plan for the diaspora, Gev? What do you say?
Monte had a great quote. It was the morning is eternal where there is no resistance. So if the plan for us as the diaspora, if the plan for us as these major Armenian organizations is to mourn, then we've lost. If it is to turn Artsakh not into an active resistance movement, but a candlelight vigil where we think about the days gone by, we're going to live in that sadness and despair forever. The only thing that we have, the only thing that we can do is to resist. We as Armenians don't have the luxury to sulk. We don't have the luxury to go numb to pain. And one more thing I would add. When has it ever been easy to be an Armenian?
Never.
Throughout the diaspora stretching back over a century, it's always been tough for us. And I see it's human, and I understand that people are sad, people feel defeated, but this is nothing new to our people. Our existence, the guarantee of our existence, never been a passive process. We've always have to actively fight to continue to exist, both as a state, as a culture, as a people, as a diaspora.
As a religion.
So our plan is that. Yeah.
We've
our
been
plan is
persecuted
that.
for our religion for centuries.
Yeah. And it's to remind the diaspora, it's to remind the homeland that, like, nothing's ever come easy for us. So if we do want to see, our sun shine again and our spring bloom again, then that means we've got to keep working.
Yeah.
If we don't, we have to keep working to change things. If we don't, the trajectory is going to go down. But as we go state to state, as we talk to people, with the new movement in Armenia, I feel like a light is being burned. And part of it is thanks to the Armenian government, because no one's done a better job at debunking all these myths that they were built on than themselves. Almost every step they take is not only wrong, but like condoned and like supported and cheered on by Azerbaijan. People have, year after year, the time goes by, those lies that the Armenian government has fed to its own people, a lot of them are being debunked. A lot of people that were fooled before are rising up. And a lot of people that were apathetic, maybe people that were against this government but didn't think it was worth like actively fighting for, are seeing their homeland being taken inch by inch, literally every day. So we're seeing an activation of people, and we're seeing a lot of people come to a certain realization that all these myths that this government has created, they're based on nothing.
Yeah.
They are hollow and they're lies. So if we're talking about up or down trajectory, the trajectory of the Armenian government is going down. I can't guarantee this movement is going to be successful, or this is going to happen, or that is going to happen. I know every day they lose supporters, and I know every day we gain them.
Yeah.
If this is the road we're going to go down, we'll go down this road.
And I think it has to do with the fact, like you were saying, that to be sulking in our defeatism and our weak inability to accomplish anything. I mean, people are going to eventually get sick of that. People are not going to want that mentality and like that kind of energy. And so, Ivercho, like, they're going to want to, hey, I want to be a winner again, or I want to have hope again. Like, it's going to come out of it like a natural response, and they're going to realize what you're saying.
They're going to think, if not me, who? If not now, when?
So Gev, exactly. It's interesting that our show Haituk Talks, we happened to start the show like right when the war started. It coincided, and our first episode was with you, and then our last episode was with you as well, Tebi Artsakh, and it almost feels like our show's life cycle, our journey is, one not only coincided with like Artsakh's recent journey, but also yours as well. And so it's like great to be able to kind of continue to talk to you throughout these like periods, good or bad. But in summary, or like kind of, I just want to know how you're feeling right now after everything you've gone through, after 9 months of blockade, after being there and losing it, losing our Artsakh, not you, but us as a whole, and then now being back here and doing work. How do you feel? Yeah.
So, I distinctly remember the first podcast that we did. I remember it because I was excited. I took decided to start it. I think you guys are branching into a new and important field, which kudos to you, the AYF, and the rest of the team. I remember, it was towards the end of that podcast as well, just as now, where you guys asked, like, there's a message you can leave, what would it be? Right. And this is while I was in Artsakh, and this is maybe in the beginning of the blockade or before it, and I said nothing is guaranteed. This notion that because we've grown up on these stories of like Armenians are strong and we're this and that, we're going to hold on to Artsakh forever, that somehow, some way, someone was going to step in and save it. Those notions, I was trying to say, are false. And if there's anything that kills us, if there's anything that will be our fatal flaw, it's not our enemies, it's not the international powers. It's our biggest enemy is our own apathy.
Yeah.
And today, I operate with that mindset because I think I was saying that, we can't let Artsakh go the way of Shushi and Van and Ani and, all of the places that we lost in Western Armenia and that have now become like these mythical places in our heads. And we lost them. And I remember at the time I said it, people were like, how can you be defeatist? How can you whatever, this and that? And I was like, I think that's the opposite of defeatism. It's saying that no matter what happens around the world, the biggest indicator if we're successful or if we're not is us, which means we have power and it means we have agency, but it also means we have the responsibility to use it. So today, I feel that we've fallen many times in our history before. You look at 1915, people thought we were going to be wiped off the face of the planet. In 1918, we created the first Armenian Republic against all odds. In the late 80s, early 90s, Armenians were being massacred and butchered throughout Azerbaijan in places like Baku and Sumkait, and we were afraid it was going to happen to the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. 4 years later, smaller armies, smaller population against all odds, not only beat the Azeris, but created an independent state and a republic. Today, this is the next challenge. We've been forced out of our homelands. We have a treasonous government, and we can sit and sulk, or like the people that came before us, we can find a will, we can find a plan, we can find a way, and we can rise. And this is going to be the story of our generation. Every generation had a challenge. Every generation was able to meet it so that we survived. And that's where we are now. And that's how I feel. I feel every day that I meet someone whose eyes that I look into that is now committed and understands what we have to lose, understands what's at stake, I feel more invigorated. And now we're just building and we're working, and those are the two things we can do.
Thank you, Gev, and we commend all your work that you've done.
We appreciate everything you've done for the Armenian cause and on the ground and
are
here
doing,
in the diaspora currently as well.
And all of those things are only because of the AYF, and is a testament to the AYF. And in some of our toughest times in Artsakh, I would tell you guys, or in the homeland, there was no more uplifting, spiritual, awakening in people, and you can see the light in them, was when we were watching you guys protest, and we were watching you guys against hate, against people's critiques and criticism, stand for the people of Artsakh when it felt at times the entire world turned its back on us. So kudos to the AYF and kudos to all of you.
Hell yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gev. You are listening to Haituk Talks, the official podcast of the AYF West. I'm Haig Minasyan.
And I'm Kohar Sanikian.
And we're just a couple of Armenians
talking in the world.
A couple of Armenians talking in the world.